Welcome to the Grow to Amazing podcast. This is Tony Mays. I am very happy to have a retired member of the United States military with me today who has a new book out on the leadership lessons that he's learned. His name is Lieutenant Colonel Oak McCulloch, and he is a long-term 23-year career in the United States Army, various civilian jobs that followed that. His kind of quote that he leads with in his book is, today's leaders have a responsibility to inspire the leaders of tomorrow. And there's a lot that goes into that, and we're going to hope to unpack some of that today. I'm very excited to have him on here, very appreciative for the time that he has served in our military. And I look forward to hearing more about that, as well as his ideas and servant leadership focus that he has had throughout his career. So his book, and I'll put a picture of it up along with the YouTube video, is called Your Leadership Legacy, Becoming the Leader You Were Meant to Be. It came out on February 12th of this year. I highly recommend picking it up, and it's a great read. It's a good read of the ideas that go into that, and we're going to unpack that today. So he shares some common sense principles that every current and aspiring leader can use. Experiences from his childhood and adult careers frame the leadership legacy is personally passed down to countless others. As Oak likes to say, great leadership handed down from generation to generation is what develops great nations. And I'm probably going to keep calling you Colonel here. My brother, his father-in-law is a retired Lieutenant Colonel from the Marine Corps. So we're on kind of a first name basis. He calls me Tony and I call him Colonel. So
That's okay. That's okay, Tony. Thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate that you took the time to have me on the show, and that you're reading the book, and
Yep.
Look forward to talking about leadership. That really is my passion right now in my life.
Absolutely. Glad to have you. So how did you, where does Oak McCulloch come from, and kind of help me understand the beginnings to your Army career, kind of set the stage for how you became a leader and how you grew into that.
Okay. So I grew up in Northern Illinois, so not too far probably from where you
Yep.
live, and which is why I live in Florida, because I'm not living in places like that anymore.
Yeah.
But I grew up in Northern Illinois. I played baseball, basketball, football through junior high and high school, and I was always the captain of my team, or I was the president of the student government, or all just leadership positions, Boy Scouts, all those kinds of things. So I knew I wanted to be a leader, and then I got a chance I won an Army ROTC scholarship to help me pay for school. I went off to West Point for a couple years, came home, helped around with the business that my father owned, and
So I got to dig into that a little bit first. So it sounds like in high school, I mean, leadership was just something you did. It wasn't, it came natural to you.
Yeah, I did. I was always, it seemed like something that was natural to me, and whether I was the leader or, I always was selected to be the leader, but people followed me anyway. So and I would tell people there are two types of leaders. There's the ones who have the title, and there are the ones that people actually follow. And hopefully you could be both. You can have the title and people will follow you.
Sure.
But in the end, that people select who their leaders are going to be.
Okay, great. So did you, you mentioned you worked with the family's business a little bit. What kind of business was that?
My father owned a bar.
Okay.
So he owned a bar for a little bit. And then I just finished up ROTC in a small in DeKalb, about 12 miles from where I grew up.
Northern Illinois.
And so that way I could still help with the business while I was going to school and doing ROTC. And I met my wife there. We've been married 34 years now, and she was in Army ROTC. She was an Army nurse.
Okay.
So it all worked out well.
How was the transition to more in ROTC? You're not necessarily, it's not like a formal Army experience, but you do learn about the Army in ROTC and what it means to take orders and follow orders and things like that. Was that a little bit different for you versus high school when you were predominantly in more of a leadership role?
Yeah, it was a little bit, although it just kind of came natural to me, and I enjoyed being in a leadership position, and I did a lot of things to help develop that. And one of the things I always tell people is, if you're trying to develop yourself as a leader, never, ever, ever turn down a leadership position. If somebody wants you to be the leader, be the leader. I always tell my cadets, when I was teaching my cadets in ROTC, I come in and I'd say, okay, I need somebody to lead this project. And I expected every single hand to go up. And if it didn't, then I was questioning, why are you here? If you don't want to be the leader, then why are you here? Because that's what we're doing.
Because the minute you get in the Army, you're going to be in a leadership role, right?
That's right. And the only way to get better at leading is to lead. I can tell you how to be a leader all day. We can have classes, we can do all that. But in the end, if you don't lead, you're not going to get better at it. It's that old saying, practice makes perfect, is absolutely true, even when it comes to that.
What was the difference for you between West Point and Northern Illinois?
So, West Point, of course, is 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Somebody's telling you when to get up, when to go to bed, when to eat, how to make your bed, how to clean your room, what to wear. In Northern Illinois, in ROTC is not that way, and I do the recruiting for Army ROTC now at a university here in Daytona Beach, Florida. And one of the things I always tell them is, you still get to walk out with that gold bar on your shoulder. So you're still a second lieutenant, the same as somebody who graduated from an academy. But you get to enjoy your college life a little bit more, and you get to make some choices and do some things, because we're not going to tell you 24 hours a day how to do things.
Sure.
And I think there's, I'm not saying one is better than the other, and I never try to tell people one's better than the other. I just always tell people, make sure you know what you're asking for when you choose the 24-hour-a-day thing, because it's not for everybody.
Sure. So what just keep going with your story if you can. And
so I graduated from ROTC. I got commissioned a second lieutenant in the
What year was this?
1986.
Okay.
And I got commissioned as an infantry officer. So I did my first 5 years in the infantry.
Awesome.
And then during those first 5 years, was deployed for Desert Shield, Desert Storm during the first Gulf War, 1990-91.
My brother-in-law was a Marine at the time and deployed as well. So
and then I also did Hurricane Hugo relief in Charleston, because I was stationed at Fort Stewart, Georgia. And when Hurricane Hugo came through and devastated Charleston, my unit got activated to go up there and work for about 90 days in Charleston. Then once I made captain, I switched over and I became an armored cavalry officer. Okay. And then I was I did hurricane relief in South Florida during Andrew.
Okay.
And then later on, I became when I became a major, senior captain and a major, I was deployed to Europe in support of operations in Bosnia. And then I was deployed in a peacekeeping role in Kosovo. So those were my deployments, my operational and.
There's a lot of stuff I want to ask you about that, but I do want to keep you to your, to our subjects. Maybe we'll have you on again someday and we can go back into some of that stuff. But it's got to be a heck of a lot of fun to drive an M1, I'm guessing, right?
It is. I always told people, because all my infantry buddies gave me a hard time when I switched over from being infantry to armor. And I said,
sure.
Look, why carry your weapon when your weapon can carry you?
Exactly.
I wisened up a little bit. But, I love being an infantry officer and I love being an armored cavalry officer. So I always tell people in my 23, I wouldn't trade a single minute of my 23 years in the Army.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So keep going then if you could. You're married the whole time as well. How many kids do you have?
Well, I've been married for 34 years to my wife, and she got commissioned before I did, so she always outranked me.
Oh, sure.
When we were on active duty, and people said, once she got out once we started having children, and she decided she was going to get out, and I actually then I got a rank that was higher than her. She said, somebody told me one time, and said, now you outrank your wife. I said, listen, I don't ever outrank my wife. It doesn't matter what rank I get to.
Yep.
There's a
if
reason
you want to stay married. Yeah.
But we got two children. I got a son who has about a 6-month-old grandson for us. And then I've got a daughter who has our 7-year-old granddaughter and our 4-year-old grandson.
Awesome. Congrats. Yeah. When did you, so what were the last few years of your service? What did those look like?
Right. So my last few years, I was an instructor at the United States Army Command General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, where I was teaching majors
Hmm.
how to be operations officers and XOs at the
Okay.
battalion and brigade level. Then I
Okay.
got selected to be an instructor at the Australian Command Staff College. So I got to go over to Canberra, Australia for 2 years and got to be the exchange officer there, and
Hmm.
got to teach some amazing not only Australian but people from all over the world.
Sure.
They do their staff colleges a little different than ours.
Hmm.
But and then my last assignment on active duty, I ran an Army ROTC program as a professor of military science at the University of South Alabama in Mobile.
Okay. Great.
And then when I retired in 2009, I was the associate director of a food bank in Mobile, and great organization, did great things. But when really wasn't me, and when they
Yeah.
offered me to come and do the recruiting for the Army ROTC program here in Central Florida, I jumped on that opportunity. And I always tell people it's tough to come to Daytona Beach, Florida, but somebody has to do it.
Yeah, that sounds really rough. That sounds really
It is.
rough.
I
Yeah.
took one for the team. Yeah.
Where had you retired before? I guess you had been in Alabama pretty
Yeah,
much
we
the whole
stayed
time.
in Mobile, and we absolutely loved Mobile. And it was
Yeah.
a tough decision for my wife and I to leave
Hmm.
Mobile because we did absolutely love it there. We had some great friends. That was the
Hmm.
first place we ever bought a house because we always lived.
Sure.
We knew we were going to move every 2 years, so we never bought a house until we were ready to settle down. And so it was a tough decision for us to move. It really
Hmm.
was.
Hmm. So what inspired you to write the book and start to publish some of the lessons you've learned?
Yeah, so when I was a professor of military science, and I would go around and I talk to high school students
Hmm.
and college students, I would talk to sports teams and I talked to the business school and different places that needed leadership.
Sure.
And and I would always ask them, what do you want to do? What do you want to be? And a lot of people would say, well, I want to be the leader. I want to lead things. And I said, okay, so what does that mean? What does that
Hmm.
look like? What does it take to be a leader? And especially at the high school level, I get this deer in the headlights look.
I
They
just want to be
knew,
in charge kind of
yeah,
thing.
well,
Yeah.
they knew they wanted to be, but they had no idea what it took to be a leader, and they
Sure.
had no idea what they were going to have to do
Hmm.
once they were the leader. So I came up with a presentation that's can be anywhere from 45 minutes to 2 hours, depending
Hmm.
on how much time I've got and what you want and all those kinds of
Hmm.
things. So I've been given that leadership lecture since 2006. And I tell people all the time, I could probably do it in my sleep and follow it down
Sure.
a couple of times. I've given it so many times.
Yeah.
But that's really what drove the book. Because then I figured, and again, at this point in my life, my passion is to help as many young men and women become the leaders that they should be, that they
Hmm.
want to be, that they should be.
Hmm.
As I can. And I knew if I wanted to reach more people, I had to write a book. And so I turned it into a book, and I started writing the book last February, about the 16th of February, and the book was published on the 12th of February. So it took me almost a year from the day I started to the day I published the book.
Gotcha.
And and then I also, one of the reasons I wrote the book is because I'd still like to get out on some speaking engagements and go talk to
Hmm.
people. Because again, I just want to get out there and talk to people and help them develop into the leaders that they were meant to be.
Sure.
And so that's really what drove this is getting my passion and getting it out there and talking to people. That's what I really want to do.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. So what does leadership mean to you?
To me, it's all about selfless service. I
Hmm.
mean, in my presentation and in the book, but certainly the first thing I talk about in the presentation is if you don't understand that leadership is not about you,
Hmm.
then you're never going to be a good leader. And in the book, the first chapter is, or the second chapter after the introduction and all that is, it's all about you. It's not about you. It's
Hmm.
all about you in that it's the things that you have to do to be a good leader. It's not
Sure.
about you in that we didn't make you the leader so that you can have more privileges, live in a
Hmm.
nicer house, get a bigger paycheck, drive a nicer car. Now,
Yep.
some of those things happen when you're the leader, and good for you if it does. But that's
Hmm.
not why we made you the leader. We made you the leader so that you can better serve those who work for you,
Yep.
on your team and those that you work for. That's why we made you the leader.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and one of my favorite quotes is a quote by Jack Welch, who he says, you know, when you were made a leader, you weren't given a crown. You were given the responsibility to bring out the best in others. That's really what leaders do. And so to me, it's all about selfless service. And if you don't understand that, you're never going to be a leader.
So kind of a humility thing, as well as servant leadership type focus. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's not about you. And I, you know, and now in the business I'm in, recruiting and helping develop the future lieutenants in the Army. You know, one of the things I always tell them, I love to go to their commissioning ceremonies. And one of the things I always tell every one of them, if I get a chance, is, you know, that to enjoy today, because today is all about you. It's a great day in your life. You'll remember this day for as long as you live. I can remember the day I got commissioned like it was yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
I said, but after today, it is never going to be about you ever again. It's about you. It's about your soldiers. It's about your unit. It's about the mission. It's about the Army. It's about the country. Then if we have time, we might talk about you if we have time.
Do you find a lot of guys have a hard time swallowing that in the long term?
You know, I don't think they do at the beginning. I think some of them don't understand.
Yeah, but it might take a little while to. Yeah,
that's right. I don't think they really understand the responsibility they're about to get into. Mm-hmm. And the ones that do a very good job, and they continue in the Army and do great things for the Army and the country. Some of them who do decide they want to get out and use all that great leadership in the civilian world, and that's okay too, because we need good leaders in the civilian world just like we do in the Army. But then some of them just they realize that once they're in there that this is not really for them, and they didn't understand what they were really biting off, and they get out as soon as they can and move on, and that's okay. That's nothing wrong with that either.
Yeah, they still put in still put in their years and gave their service. So
that's right, and hopefully they helped somebody along the way.
Yeah, yeah. Where do you take it from there, leadership wise? What's the next step for you? So
I always tell people, you know, besides being selfless service, is that you have to understand that leadership is leadership. You know, I get asked quite often to come talk to an organization or spend the day in an organization, whether it's an athletic team or a college organization or a business, and they'll say, can you just come take a look? You know, we're having some issues, and just come take a look and see what we could do better. And some people, you know, when I come up there, they say, well, you don't know anything about this business, so you don't know how to lead in this business. You don't even know how to lead in the military. And I say, are you kidding me? Leadership is leadership. It doesn't matter what business you learned it in or where you practiced it. If you know how to lead, you can lead. One of the things I always say is I hate hospitals. I don't know anything about hospitals. I hate hospitals because there's bad people trying to give me shots and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't want to go into a hospital at all, but if you put me in charge of a hospital tomorrow, I guarantee you I can run it because I know how to lead. Leadership is leadership. And I proved it in the food bank. I knew nothing about a food bank. And when I took over as the associate director, I was running the day-to-day operations of that food bank. And in the 18 months that I was there as the associate director, we increased the amount of food that we handed out from 1.2 or 1.8 million pounds of food in a year to 3.2 million pounds of food. That's awesome. I mean, leadership is leadership, and you got to understand that because the civilian world out there is hungry for leaders. You know, not only the military, and I always tell people, look, military, we're going to teach you all kinds of great things. That the civilian world wants all that, and you know, whether you're ready, whether you want to leave or not, they're going to come and ask you to leave because they want that. Not only taught you, but we've given you experience to do. Well,
and I don't think most companies are very good at doing leadership level training for their people and helping them with that advancement path. And I know the companies that I've worked for, not my current company necessarily, but previous companies they paid lip service to it and they put you into training programs, but they don't necessarily enable success and support you as you walk that leadership growth journey.
Right. Well, you know, and one of the things that I'm putting out right now is I would love to come and talk to companies.
Sure.
And I don't have any companies yet lined up. I'm trying, but I've got a couple football teams that across the country who are talking about having me come talk to their teams. I've got a couple universities who are talking about having me come talk to the student body, whoever wants to come, and some select people. So hope, and a couple of law enforcement agencies as well. And hopefully that all works out. But I'd love to go talk to companies, because it really is important to build that leadership and to understand what it takes to build a leadership in that organization, because it doesn't just happen. I got a friend, Coach Roger Hughes, who runs a football team here at Stetson University. And he talks all the time about the importance of building the culture of your organization and how hard it is. And the Army does a great job of building that culture, but between its Army values and the things that we hold true as support and defend the Constitution and all those things that we support true. We do a great job of doing it, but it doesn't come easy, and it isn't automatic. And no matter what organization, it isn't automatic. You have to work at it. Yeah. And I'd love to have that opportunity to help some companies work through that, not only by giving the presentation and maybe having some people read the book, but a half-day seminar where we can sit down and talk about what it means to not only be a leader, but then where do we go from here? How do you keep developing that leadership in your company and your organization? So I would love to do that, and I think that's very important.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. I'll see what we can do to publicize it as part of this as well. So where do you think leadership goes from there? I mean, how do you start to build that culture within a company?
Yeah.
Is it ownership? Is it, what would you say?
Yeah, I think you got mentorship. You got to have senior leaders who are mentoring junior people. And I always tell people that, that's part of your job as a leader. Leaders develop leaders. They don't develop followers. That's not what leaders do. Good leaders develop leaders. And that's part of your job, is to mentor the people that you think are going to be the next generation of leaders. You don't have time to mentor everybody. I mean, let's be honest. Especially the bigger the organization gets, the less time you have. And I always use the philosophy that the military uses, and that's the philosophy of 3 to 5 people. You can manage 3 to 5 people. I don't care how big of an organization the Army is. You can talk about the chief of staff of the Army. I promise you, he is only managing about 3 to 5 people. And then they manage 3 to 5 people, and then they manage 3 to 5 people, and that's how it works. And you can do that in any organization, but you got to pick out the people that you think are the diamonds in the rough, the ones that are going to replace you someday. And that's your job, is to train the people who are going to replace you.
I was just gonna. That's one of my favorite quotes. You got to train the people that are going to take your job eventually.
Absolutely, because someday you are going to leave. That's going to happen, and so you need to make sure that the people are there. But so you got to mentor people. That's one thing. And then the other piece of it that is building that culture is giving them the ability to make decisions. Micromanaging is evil. And I'm sure all of us, anybody listening here, has had that happen to them. Somebody will say, "Hey, Tony, do this for me." And then when you start doing it, they look over your shoulder and they say, "Yeah, I wouldn't do it that way. I do it this way. And don't do that, do this." I always want to turn around and tell people, then do it yourself. You gave me the task, let me do it. I promise you I'll get it done. But don't micromanage people. You got to give people the ability to do the things that you want. Now, you can never delegate responsibility. That's yours as the leader. But you can delegate the authority of those people to do the things that you want them to do. And if you do that, you'd be absolutely amazed at what they do for you. So you got to do that piece of it. You got to mentor people. You got to allow them to take charge and do some stuff and give them the authority to do so. Doesn't mean you don't go check up on them. And what I always tell people, look, I'm all about, we're all going to fail.
It's got to be okay that they make mistakes.
We're all going to make mistakes. I don't care who you are. There are no perfect people in this world. And I mean, it's just, we're all going to make a mistake. And as a leader, it's okay to let your people make mistakes. It's not okay to let them fail. That's your job, is to make sure they don't fail. But I always tell people, and I had a 4-star general when I was working for him. He was a colonel, but he ended up a 4-star general, and was always one of my mentors. And he used to tell me, "Oak, if you didn't make a mistake today, you probably didn't do anything."
Yep.
And
Yep.
that's
Exactly.
okay. I
Yep.
don't care if you made a mistake. What I care about is, what do you do when you make that mistake? Do you
Mhm.
try to sweep it under the rug? Do you blame somebody else for it? Do you try to hide it? Or do you walk into my office and you say, hey, boss, I messed up and here's how we're going to fix it?
Mhm.
Because that's what, in the end, that's what it's about. So you got to mentor people. You got to give them the responsibility to be leaders without micromanaging them.
Mhm.
And then you got to give people feedback.
Sure.
The communication has to be a two-way street. You
Mhm.
know, if you think being a leader and communicating as a leader is you telling people what to do and how to do it and when to do it 24 hours a day, then you're
Yep.
not a leader, you're a dictator.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Leadership and communication in a good leader has to have two-way communication, or you're not a leader.
And I think that's one of the things about the military that is it is one of the biggest misconceptions I've ever seen, is that people think the military is exactly that, where it's the general tells his colonels to go do this, and it gets all the way down to the company and platoons and things like that, and go take this hill, go do this, and the soldiers will just do it like an automaton, and they won't have to understand, they won't have to have
Right.
ownership of the results or anything like that, and
Yeah.
they just think that's a military culture, and you can probably attest it's couldn't be further from the truth. But
Oh, absolutely. And I always tell people that's one of the reasons why our Army is the greatest Army in the world, is because we empower people at the lowest level to make decisions.
hmm
The people who are on the ground looking at it. I always use the example, and especially when I was in Australia teaching at their staff college, and I had
sure.
officers from Australia, New Zealand, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, all over the southern Pacific and South Pacific.
hmm
I always tell people that that's one of the things that allows us to do what we do, is that in our Army, we have sergeants who are making decisions that in other armies around the world, full bird colonels are making,
Sure.
because
Sure.
we give them the authority to do that. Again, we
hmm
don't, the responsibility is still mine.
Yeah.
If we mess up, my name's on the blame line.
Yep.
But
Yep.
but if you train your people right,
Yeah.
then you can afford to give them that authority. And that leads you to another great quote by Mr. Branson. And he says, train your
Okay.
people well enough that they can leave and do whatever they want, but treat
hmm
them well enough so that they don't want to.
Exactly.
But
Yep.
but your job as a leader is to train your team, is to
hmm
build that team so that it is the best team out there. So that's all part of that culture as well, is
hmm
building that.
And trust and is a big part of that, I would imagine
Oh,
too.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And trust is huge.
hmm
If your team doesn't trust that you have their best interest at heart, then they are not going to do the things that you need them to do. And in the Army, again, unlike most professions, we're talking about people's lives a lot of time.
Yep.
And I've seen it. If your soldiers trust you, you can tell them to go take that machine gun nest, and they're going to do it. You
hmm
know, when human nature tells them to lay down on the ground,
Yeah. Yep.
if they know that you are a good leader and that you have their interest at heart, and
Yep.
that we got to get the mission done, then they will do whatever you ask them to do. And I think that's the
hmm
same way in the civilian world. I know it is, because it was at the food bank, even though I didn't have to ask them to do stuff like that.
Yeah.
Other things that we ask them to do, if you're taking care of them and they trust you, then they will do what you ask them to do.
Yep. Well, and I think it's also how you frame, it might be also how you frame things. So as the company commander, you may not tell the squads exactly what to do. That's up to them to figure out, because you've empowered them to do that, but you're going to tell them what the objective is. And it's kind of a two-way street, I would guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I always tell people, rather than micromanaging, and I had another boss who used to tell me, Oak, when you start dealing with micromanaging and giving people instructions and letting people do stuff, then you got the scale on either end of the scale. You got communism. You're telling them exactly what to do, when to do, evil of micromanaging, and,
Sure.
and on the other end, you have basically Attila of the Hun. You're
Mhm.
letting whatever happens. And he says you want to be closer to the Attila of the Hun. Still have some control,
Mhm.
but you want to be closer to that way so that they can make some decisions.
So
That
there's
you
some freedom in there.
want.
Yep. Yep.
But I always tell people, when I task somebody to do something, I use what I call the objective and guidepost. I say, okay, boys and girls, this is what I want it to look like in the end.
Yep.
That's your objective. I don't care how you get there. Here are the left and right limits, your guideposts. You can use this much money. You can use these people. You can use these resources. You have this much time. Now go do it. Now that doesn't mean I don't check up on them once a week or whatever, with an in-progress review or during a staff meeting or whatever. But I pretty much let them go and do whatever they're going to do unless they have questions. And I don't care how they got there. I don't. And if probably wouldn't have been the way I got there, but who cares? As long as I get what I wanted, why do we care how they got there?
Exactly. Yeah.
And the problem is that if you don't do it that way, if you micromanage people, then you are affecting your organization for the rest of the time that person that you're micromanaging is in your organization. That's the evil of micromanaging, because you are cheating that person out of an experience that they can no longer pass on to somebody else. So as long as that person is working for you, then you are cheating everybody who works for him out of that experience.
Absolutely. Yep. So you mentioned mentoring, you mentioned giving your teams that leadership capacity and things like that. What else goes into leadership for you?
Yeah, building that team. And I'm a firm believer, I believe in winning. I know that's a concept in today's world that is
participation trophies. Come on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe in winning. I mean, it's important, and to be the best at whatever it is you do. And part of your job as the leader is to build that team that is going to be the best at whatever it is that you're doing. And I've heard people say, and I've had people say to me, I don't compare myself to anybody else. I just compare myself to myself. I said, well, in the fantasy world, that might work. Yeah. But in the real world, bosses compare you with other people who are doing the same job you are, whether you like it or not. That's how we decide who gets promotions. That's how we decide who gets raises. That's how we decide all those things. And you can believe that that's not true if you want, but you're living in fantasy land. Yeah. So we have to build organizations and teams that win, that are good at what they do, whether you call that winning or just doing the right things that they need to do to be good at what they do. Because in the corporate world, if you don't do that, you're not going to be in business very long.
Exactly. Yep.
So we got to get to that point where we're doing that, and part of that is training people. You pick the best people, and again, I'm a firm believer in diversity, but not in diversity's sake. I don't believe that you will go out and say, okay, I'm going to go out and build a team, and I'm going to have one person's going to be white, and one's going to be black, and one's going to be Hispanic, and one's going to be a female, and one's going to you pick the best people, and you want a diverse organization, but diversity for diversity's sake doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help your organization. It doesn't help the team. It doesn't help you, and it certainly doesn't help the people you think you're helping.
Yep. So that's one of the things that I love about the Army and the military in general. It was one of the first parts of America to integrate as part of everything. So it's definitely been something that has been part of the culture, at least from my perspective, on looking in from the outside anyway.
Yeah, absolutely it is. I tell people that all the time, that the Army has always been one of those forward-looking organizations that gives people. We look at talent. That's what we look at. In our Army ROTC program, we had this thing called a Ranger Challenge Team. It's a 2-day, very competitive, very physical event, and we have a tryout for it. And anybody in the program, all 388 cadets, can come out and try out if they want. And we pick the best people. We put together 2 teams. Each team is 9 people primary with 2 alternates, so 22 people get picked to be. And we don't care if they're all seniors, all juniors, all sophomores, all freshmen, all male, all female, all white, black, green, pink, or purple. We don't care. We want the best people. And because of that, this last year, we put together 2 teams, and they finished 1st and 9th out of 59 teams.
Awesome.
And then they went up to West Point, and they finished 6th out of 44 teams.
Which is like round 2, so it's the winners from the other competitions. Right. Exactly. That's right. Yep. That's awesome. Yeah. And UCF is not necessarily a big school, is it? I mean, it's a Division I school, but it's not a necessary.
So Embry-Riddle is
Or
not.
Embry-Riddle. Yeah.
Embry-Riddle we only have 5,000 students at
Yeah.
Embry-Riddle. And, but it does, our program is made up of cadets from 4 different schools.
Okay.
Stetson University, Bethune-Cookman University, Embry-Riddle, and Daytona State College. So between all of them, we got probably about 10,000 students to pick
Okay.
from.
Okay. But that's still basically
it has 61,000 students.
Yeah, exactly. And my Division III college that I went to in La Crosse, Wisconsin was 10,000 kids. So, yeah.
Right.
Which they do have an excellent ROTC program as well. It's one of the better ones in the Midwest. So
yeah, good.
Yep. So where do you take leadership from there with the people you talk to?
So I think, there are a couple things that you got to be able to do. No doubt about it. If you want to be a leader, you have to be able to communicate. Mm-hmm. So you've got to develop your leadership skills, your communication skills, and that's across the board. That's speaking, that's writing, that is your body language, whatever. And one of the examples I give is I still go around and talk to high school students because I do the recruiting for the program. Mm-hmm. And I'll go to a high school and I'll give the exact same presentation 7 times.
Sure.
Throughout the day. One day, sure. Each class I give the exact same presentation.
Yep.
And I always tell my wife when I come home, I feel like I've been beaten with a baseball bat, and I thought at first I was thinking, well, why? Because all I'm doing is standing there talking, but I'm not just standing there talking. I'm on display. And so I'm always making sure that, I'm looking the part, all those things that you have to do. And that's all part of communications. If you can't communicate, you can't be a leader. And I've talked to people and they say, well, I can't get up in front of people and talk. And I said, well, you can, if you want to. I said, but if you can't, if you decide that you can't, if you let your fears get the best of you, then you will never be a leader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that was some of the growth my son had, because when he started in Boy Scouts, he's like, I don't want to be a squad, I don't want to be a patrol leader, I don't want to be any part of the leadership in Boy Scouts. But then by his junior and senior year in high school, he was in charge of running one of the people in charge of the marching band of 190 kids at the school. So that's being huge. Out in front of everybody and things like that, and he wanted that. That was a role that he loved and wanted to be there. So I get you exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think it builds on itself, and that's one of the reasons why I tell people never turn down a chance to be a leader, because every time you do it and you're going to learn more, which then will make you a better leader. And every time you do well, then it drives you to be a leader again and use the things that you learn. And it's all about putting all those experiences in the back of your head, and at some point being able to pull them out and say, well, I remember, you're probably never going to be in the exact same situation, but you're going to be in a situation similar that you can say, I had a boss who did this, and it goes both ways. You can say, and I'm never going to do that. Yep. Or I had a boss that did this, and if I just tweak it a little bit and do this, then that's going to work for me in this situation.
Sure.
But the other part of that is that, the communication piece, again, it's a two-way street. And one of the things I always tell people is that, I've always been pretty successful about when I would have something I had to do, I'd walk in and pull all my junior leaders in with me. And I'd say, okay, guys and gals, this is what we got to do. Mm-hmm. Here you go. Give me some ideas. And I had another mentor who retired, a 4-star general, who told me, Oak, a good idea is a good idea, whether it comes from a private or a general. So the lowest ranking person in the Army to the highest ranking person. And then he'd say, and a bad idea is a bad idea, whether it comes from a private or a general.
Sure.
But you can learn just as much from somebody doing something badly or poorly or doing something dumb as you can from somebody who's doing something well. And never turn down those chances to learn from other people, because that's one of the ways we develop our leadership skills.
And for me, it's do you have the humility to listen to those that are lower in the food chain from you, and can you set your ego aside? Because to advance in any organization, you have to have some level of ego at some point, but it's can you can you keep it in check? Can you keep it internal to yourself? Can you talk about that for a second? Or
Yeah, so I get people, and in my business of recruiting, young men and women, that we get some people that come in that are pretty confident.
yeah,
And
that line between cocky and confident, right?
absolutely, I get accused of crossing that line on occasion myself. But I always tell people, when somebody says that, I said, look, if he doesn't think he's good, why should I think he's good? I
Exactly.
mean, you got to have some of that, otherwise
Mhm.
you're not going to be as good as you can be. But there is that line, and you got to make sure that you stay on the other side of that line. But having said that, one of the things that you got to understand is that you don't have all the answers, and
Mhm.
and as a leader, you're if you're not using everybody in your organization, then you're relying on only your knowledge and your experience. And I'll
Yep.
give you an example of when that really came to me. I
Oh,
was a
good.
brand new lieutenant. I was a platoon leader. I was just getting ready to be a platoon leader. I came to the unit, and my unit was already out in the field doing a dismounted live fire exercise. And my company commander took me out there. I got selected. There were 3 lieutenants, and I got selected to get the 1 platoon that was available. So he takes me out and he introduces me to my platoon sergeant, and Sergeant First Class Pinson, and Sergeant First Class
This
Pinson.
was what? This was what year? This was what year?
1987.
Okay, so was he a Vietnam vet or not?
Yes, he was. Yeah,
Okay, wow.
and
So grizzled doesn't go
yeah.
quite far enough
So,
to.
I'm 5'8", 5'9". Sergeant First Class Pinson was 6'6".
Okay.
And he says, "Come on over here, sir." He said, let's walk over here. We'll sit underneath this tree and we'll eat our lunch." And so we were sitting there eating an MRE, and he said to me, he said, "Listen, sir, you're in charge." He said, "You're the platoon leader, you're the boss. We will do things the way you want to do it."
Hmm.
He said, "But I have been in the Army for 23 years. I was 25 years old." He'd been in the Army almost as long as I've been alive.
Yep.
And he said, "I've seen it done every which way you can imagine." He said, "And I will tell you if you're messing up." He said, "If you still want to do it that way, we will do it that way because you are the boss." He said, "But I'm going to tell you if you're messing up. And I will tell you right now that I give him credit for helping to develop me into the young leader that got me started on the right path."
That's
And
awesome.
and he was not afraid to walk up to me and say, "Hey, sir, that's pretty stupid.
Yeah. Yeah.
You might want to rethink that." And every time he said that, I stopped and rethought it, because again, he had all kinds of experience that
Yeah.
for me to think that I had all the answers is just insanity. So if you're not using everybody's experiences, then you're cheating yourself in that organization. And what I always tell people, that generally what happens with me is when I walk in and I throw it out there and say, "Okay, here's what we got to do. Give me some ideas." Is that I'll take a little bit from this person, a little bit from that person, a little bit from this person. I'll take some from my opinion and I'll put that all together and we'll come up with this answer. You know
Sure.
what the great thing about that is that now everybody buys into it, because it
Absolutely.
isn't Lieutenant Colonel McCullough's solution or Captain McCullough's solution or Oak McCulloch's solution. It's our solution.
Yep.
And now they all buy into it.
Yep. And even if some of the things that those people, like you said before, if they're doing something different than how you might do it, but it's 95% of the same thing, who cares? I mean,
Yeah.
it's then you get that buy-in, like you said.
Absolutely. And you're not going to use everybody's ideas all the time. And
Yeah.
like the general who told me, a good idea is a good idea, a bad idea is a bad idea. So somebody you think is going to, one of your top performers one day may give you one of the worst ideas you've ever heard in your life. And that's okay. And somebody who's not one of your best performers may on that day give you the best idea that you've ever heard. So, some days you'll use their ideas, some days you won't, but at least you asked. That's the key. You asked.
Yep. And you're listening to the whole team and not just your 1 or 2 favorite people or playing favorites or anything like that.
Right. That's right.
So did the Army ever put you in kind of no-win scenarios or to see how you handle failure?
No, I don't know that I've ever been. I can't say that I've ever been in a no-win scenario.
Okay.
There have been some tough. I've been in some tough scenarios. I mean, one of them wasn't even. I mean, it wasn't combat, but I'll tell you, one of the toughest things was when I got deployed to Charleston for Hurricane Hugo. I was an infantry officer. I knew how kill people and blow stuff up. That was what I get paid to do.
You're not an
Now,
MP, you're not any of that stuff. Yeah.
yeah, now they put me in charge of a warehouse. And I was like, a warehouse? What are you talking about? What's a warehouse? I didn't know how to run a warehouse. I learned very quickly, and my soldiers
Sure.
adapted amazingly. I mean, I said, okay, guys, this is what we got to do. And we quickly figured it out, and we did it. But that was a tough thing, was coming, trying to figure that piece out. How do we do that? How do we keep track of things coming in and going out, and where do we put it to make it the most efficient? And we made some mistakes, but we figured it out and we did it.
So do you see, speaking of that, do you see like resiliency and adaptability being a big part of leadership as well?
Yeah, and not just leadership, but also followership as well.
Sure.
But you got to be a good follower before you can be a good leader. But you got to be resilient. Hal Moore, who was the author of
Love that movie.
Soldiers Once and Young, and had that huge battle in Vietnam, one of the first American battles. He always used to say, "There's life is not like baseball. It is not 3 strikes and you're out." He said, you just keep trying and trying and trying until you get it, until something works. He said, if you try something that doesn't work, try something else. If that doesn't work, try something else. And that's part of being a leader. And, Napoleon, who, still one of the greatest generals
absolutely
in the history of the world, he used to say, a leader is somebody who gives people hope. No matter what the situation, no matter how bad things look, you as the leader have to give hope. And if you can do that, then that's part of it.
I'm not sure there was a whole lot of hope in his Russian campaign, but
there at the end, there wasn't much hope. And I don't think he could muster that one.
Yep. So if the listeners haven't heard much about that, go read up on it and you'll see what I mean. But yeah. So what else goes into leadership for you? Is there anything else to add to that?
Yeah. So one of the things to go along with, to bringing up Napoleon, is I always talk about communications, that you have to have somebody that you can bounce an idea off of. And Napoleon, I always use his example. He always, when he was on a battlefield, he'd be sitting on his big white horse and he'd be commanding the battle. And before he'd issue out an order to his generals, he had a corporal, a low-ranking soldier, who would stand right next to him, and he'd issue him the order. And he'd say, okay, young man, tell me what I just told you in your own words. What I tell you to do. And if he could do that, then he gave the order to his generals. If he didn't, if he couldn't, then he would figure out that it could be misunderstood. That old adage, if it can be misunderstood, it will be. So he would start over. And I always tell people, you got to have that Napoleon's corporal. You got to have that person that you can bounce ideas off of, who are not afraid to hurt your feelings. It can't be somebody who's an yes man. It's got to be somebody who is not afraid to hurt your feelings.
Who is that for you besides your Sergeant First Class?
My wife.
Your wife?
I
Okay.
I don't know how many times I come home and say, "Hun, you know what I'm going to do tomorrow?" And she'd say, "What?" And I'd tell her, and she'd say, "Are you stupid?" I didn't think so, but maybe. She wouldn't say it exactly like that, but she'd say, that's probably not a good idea. You got to really rethink that one. And she saved me from doing some pretty stupid things over the years.
Yep. That's a great lesson for listening to your wives and taking advantage of their perspective, because they know you probably better than you know yourself sometimes.
Absolutely. And they know your strengths and your weaknesses too. So, something that you were planning on doing that may not be right in your powerhouse, maybe you need to rethink that, and they can probably tell you that, and they will tell you that if they, like my wife, like I said, the same thing when I write something, written communication, before I send it anybody or let anybody see it, I give it to her and it comes back all red, blood all over it. But, but she keeps me from sending out, silly stuff. So I think that's part of it. The communication piece of it is very, very important.
So do you have one example of where you might have struggled the most as a leader, and kind of how you recovered from it? Anything you can think of? If not, that's okay too. But
yeah, I don't get asked that question. I don't know that I've ever been asked that question.
Okay. I try to be different, so
Yeah, I know I will tell you, when I took over the food bank, when I took over as the operations officer. Again, I knew nothing about a food bank. So I was trying to learn it as I was going along. And I was trying to, part of being a leader is motivating people. And,
Sure.
and so I was trying to figure out what it is to motivate people, because I just could, in the Army, it was easy. I'd walk into my soldiers and I'd say, okay, we kill people, we blow stuff up, we defend the Constitution of the United States, we defend the American way of life. Let's go.
Yeah.
Motivated. Never had a problem getting people motivated.
Yeah.
You know what? That didn't work at the food bank.
Yeah. Was it a lot of volunteers in the food bank as well?
There were some volunteers, and there were some people there that had been there a long time and wanted to do things the way they'd always done it. And so I was struggling. And then one day in a meeting, we were sitting there and we were trying to figure out this food handout that was big, huge, one of our biggest ones of the years that we did every year. And we're trying to figure it out. And it was about 3 weeks out, and about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I saw people closing their notebooks and getting ready to leave and standing up. And I said, what are you doing? We're not done. And they said, well, it's 4 o'clock. It's time to go home. And I said, but we're not done. We still have things to discuss so that we get this thing right. And they said, but it's time to go home. And I said, okay. I said, whoever wants to leave, leave. But before you leave, let me make one thing perfectly clear. 3 weeks from now, when we mess this up and some 19-year-old unmarried young lady goes home and can't feed her 2-month-old baby or a year-old baby because we didn't get this right, it's your fault.
Yeah.
How many people you think left?
None of them. Yeah.
0. Figured it out.
Yeah.
And so that was, I was struggling. It probably took me about two months or so to figure out what and then, you think that's pretty simple, but when you're in those situations, sometimes it isn't. And I always tell people to figure out what's going to motivate your people.
Yeah.
Now I know, after doing that, figure out what makes your organization unique. And that's probably what is going to motivate those people.
Awesome.
And everybody wants a sense of purpose. That's why we do things, is for that sense of purpose.
Well, and probably some of those long timers may have forgotten a little bit about why they were there. And you get so caught up in the mechanics of doing it day to day that it's easy to do. I mean,
It is. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. So what else? I mean, where else do you take your leadership training with the people you work with?
Yeah. I think that's the last piece of it that I guess I would say is that you need to continue to develop your leadership. Leadership is a journey. It is not a destination. You don't wake up one day and say, I'm now the most perfect leader there is. That doesn't happen. We can all get better all the time. And it is a journey. So you always have to continue to develop your leadership skills. And I tell people one of the ways to do that is to read books and certainly autobiographies and books about leadership. And there are a lot of good leadership books out there. But
what are a few you might recommend? What are a few you might recommend?
So one of my favorite is by Jocko Willing, and it's Extreme Ownership. And I think that's one of the it is an absolute great book out there. And I think it's easy to read it. And it has, whether you're in the military or whether you're in business, it doesn't matter. I think it's a good one. So I think that's probably the one I would recommend. I've
actually reviewed that book on the podcast as one of my first episodes. Yeah.
It's a great book. It really is. But so read autobiographies though, because then not only are you learning what a great leader did, but you're learning why they did what they did, what decisions they made, how they made that decision, what was going through their mind when they made that decision. So read autobiographies, read leadership books. And what I always tell people about my leadership book, is that it is not about theory. This is everyday things that every leader, every person can do to become a better leader. Theory is important, and we need theory, and we need to learn that in the classroom, but that's not what this book is about. It's about getting out there and actually learning how to lead on a daily basis. So read everything you can read about leadership, and then never turn down a leadership position. Like we discussed earlier. And then, just continue to think about what it is that makes you, because what works for me may not work for you. So you've got to figure out what works for you. And the only way you're going to do that is to actually go out and do it and be the leader. Because again, we can sit in a classroom and talk about it all day long for a year, but that ain't not going to make you a leader.
An Army guy with introspection and things like that. Come on now, you can't have that. So
yeah, exactly. I actually got invited one time to sit on a council that was developing a leadership curriculum. And,
sure.
And we're talking about all the great things that you got to have in the classroom and to develop that. And then they were like, okay, we're done. I said, what? We're not done. I said, where's the hands-on piece? Where are we in this curriculum now? Are they going to actually get to go out and do something? And use that stuff that we taught them in the classroom? That's when they're going to become the leader, not when they read it and sit in the classroom. And it took me a little bit, but I finally convinced them that, you got to have some hands-on piece to it. Otherwise, we're wasting their time.
Yeah, and it doesn't really matter how complex it is, but I can absolutely see your point of if they're not actually trying to implement that and actually lead somebody, you're not going to know what words to use. You're not going to know what mistakes you're going to make, anything like that.
That's right. That's right. And again, we're all going to make mistakes. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's going to happen. Again, you just got to make sure that when you do make that mistake, you own up to it. Because your name is on the blame line. And I always tell people, look, as a leader, you are responsible for everything, everything that organization does, good or bad. And so you've got to own it. And that, that's part of the extreme ownership that they talk about. And it is absolutely true. As a leader, you have to own being the person on that blame line.
Yep. Let me just, one more question, think of it kind of in the extreme ownership line of thinking, but a lot of what we talked about today was kind of leading down the chain. How did you lead up the chain to your commanding officers above you?
I think that goes back to the communication piece that we talked about, where most people think that in the military and even in the business world, it's all a one-way street coming down. And it's not, and at least not for organizations that are successful. You got to be brutally honest with people. And I can remember walking in my boss's office a couple of times and say, hey, boss, that decision you made, that's a horrible decision. And this is the effect that it's having down at the lower levels. And then, and then I would usually get one of two reactions. Either they'd say, you're right, let's fix that. Or they'd say, don't care, Lieutenant, get out of my office and go do it.
And that gave you a good state for the organization, right? I mean, as far as
and you're going to get those type of leaders, unfortunately. But a good leader, when you walk into their office and you tell them that something's wrong, then it's going to perk their attention and hopefully it will allow them to at least look at it. Doesn't mean that they're going to do what you want them to do, but at least you have gotten them to where they look at the problem and try to figure out a solution. And General Eisenhower used to say that when he had a problem, he would get up and he'd walk a circle around his desk. And if he didn't find the solution, the problem there, the cause of the problem, he'd walk a bigger circle. So he'd walk the offices outside his office. And then if he didn't find it, he'd walk a bigger circle. And I always tell people, the reason he got up and walked around his desk is because he might have been the problem.
Yeah.
And again, going back to your ego thing, where we talked about ego, you got to be able to put your ego away and say, you know what, I didn't do a good job there.
Yep. So get out there, practice leadership, study, learn what your strengths and weaknesses are, all those things, right?
That's right. That's right.
So his book is Your Leadership Legacy, Becoming the Leader You Were Meant to Be. It's available hardcover, paperback, and Kindle, and all through Amazon. You also have a website, I believe, also, correct?
I do. My website is www.ltcoak, so LTC Oak McCulloch, McCulloch.com. And on there, not only it has a link to take you to the Amazon site to buy the book if that's what you want to do, but it also has my lectures that I give. I've got probably about 9 or 10 presentations that I give. I give the leadership presentation. I give how to be successful. I have some history presentations that I give. I have my personal experiences in the first Gulf War and in Kosovo.
Awesome.
So there's all kinds of things on there that I can that if you want me to come give one of those, I'm happy to do so. And you can You can
Sure.
contact me through there. You can also subscribe, and I just started putting out I just put out my second blog.
Oh,
and
okay, great.
it goes to the people who are subscribed to my site. So if you subscribe, then you'll get things that I'm not putting out other places.
Sure. That's awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely publicize that all as part of it. And I love the book, and I love the ideas that you've got in there. And I really appreciate your 23 years of service to the country and your continuing service. It's not like you're not serving right now, helping to groom the next round of leaders for this country. So I really appreciate all of that. But
yeah, well, thank you, Tony. I appreciate you having me on the show. It was great to be on the show, and it's great. Like I said, this is my passion.
absolutely.
This is not about. This is about me getting the message out on developing our leaders, because we need to develop the leaders of tomorrow, because they're gonna, at some point, old people like us are gonna turn around and say, "Okay, young man, young lady, you're now in charge, and hopefully you do better than we did." And the only way they're gonna do better than we did is if we train them right.
Yep, exactly. So thank you so much for being on the podcast, and I wish you the best of luck, and people pick up the book, take a look at it, and apply the lessons that he's got in there.
Thanks, Tony. I appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you.